So this commentary that I'm going to be focusing on is pretty much an article I came across about a week ago that involves a person who I consider an R&B icon. I don't care what anyone say. And that person is Bobby Brown, singer who was like at the top of the charts in the late 1980s, early 90s, and who went through a lot involving drugs, alcohol, addiction, arrest, confinement in the criminal justice system, also losing the fame, also Whitney, also hitting the rock bottom to come back to the top, and being successful again isn't necessarily being on the top of the charts, but being on top of your health, both physical and mental, And yes, Bobby has put on weight, but that happens with a lot of people who use substances, narcotics, alcohol for years, and when they become clean, they pack on pounds. So that's the reason why he does look bloated. I want to make that clear. But People magazine actually printed an article based on an interview he gave them where he was actually abused as a child. And his abuse wasn't necessarily physical, but it was actually sexual. And according to People magazine, it's just unbelievable. So it reads, Bobby Brown says being molested by a priest changed the course of his life. It was the reason I abused myself. Bobby Brown is sharing things he never thought he would. The hit R&B singer sat down with People ahead of his new A&E documentary, Biography, Bobby Brown, premiering May 30th, to discuss the biggest triumphs and tragedies of his life, including his battle with addiction, the loss of 2 of his children, and a traumatic secret he's kept hidden for over 40 years. Brown, 53, grew up in a rough section of Boston and says that his first weight loss was that of his innocence. In the documentary, he recalls being a young child and witnessing his mother being beaten and arrested by police after trying to intervene in the arrest of some neighbors. In the aftermath, he says in the series, I was sent to a temporary custody by social services, which was supposed to be a religious place, but it wasn't a very nice place to be for a child. One of the priests tried to molest me. He tried to touch my private parts. At that time, I was a young boy. I didn't know what sexual boundaries were. I just knew I didn't like being touched. Some things are hard to forget. That really, really bothered me as a child and as a grown adult, Brown tells People, of being touched inappropriately before fighting back and fleeing the religious facility. In hindsight, he says, I think it was part of the reason I did other things, drugs, alcohol, why I abused myself. Brown has now been free of narcotics for 20 years. The source says he did not plan for the painful memory to surface. I had tucked it down so deep in my soul that I didn't think I would talk about it again, says Brown, who says as a kid he coped by embracing music and rebelling against all forms of authority. Now that he's sharing his story, he says being able to talk about it and get it out helps. Looking back, I could see where things went wrong for me. Brown adds that talking about it helped me get through a lot of other things that had been bothering me, especially that. And it also reads, if you or someone you know has been victim of sexual abuse, text STRENGTH to the crisis text line at 741-741 to be connected to a certified crisis counselor. Now, I want to say that it takes a lot of guts to come forward with something such as this, especially being a man and especially being a black man, because we all know with black men, sexuality is like a big, I don't want to say target, but it's like a big, I would say it's an issue that they go through. Whether it's being too masculine, or whether it's being too feminine, or whether it's just being like in the middle and seeming asexual, or seeming like you're dangerous to society, or seeming like you're too weak. Black men go through it a lot when it comes to sexuality. And I've spoken to a lot of them through the years, and they've told me stories. And I gotta say, when it comes to being abused sexually as children, Black boys are rarely believed. And a lot of them do go into drugs and alcohol abuse, or go into a life of crime, or rebel against authority, or in the case of Bobby Brown, basically do an array of all those things. I grew up in the era of Bobby Brown's fame. I remember when he sold 7 million copies in the United States of his second album, Don't Be Cruel. And I remember when I used to see him on stage gyrating and basically simulating like he was having sex, okay, humping the stage, the ground of the auditorium, the stage, whatever, pulling girls up, and basically, doing things that now we look as normal on stage, but back then in 88, 89, and 90, it was very provocative. He was a teenager. He was about 18, 19 years old. And I remember my grandmother was basically saying, like, oh my Lord, that Bobby Brown, he is a wild one. Like, he needs to be restrained. And I thought that was unique because it was a word that I never heard. I was 5 years old. And my grandmother did not like Bobby Brown because he was so bold with his sexuality. So my grandmother figured he's been having sex for a long time. When he was in New Edition, he was like bold and brazen with it when he was only 15 years old, which was very provocative. But my mother, on the other hand, basically had sympathy for him because she was like, he's been through a lot. And my mother was like, I work in the criminal justice system, and you never know what these kids go through. Now, in hindsight, I don't think my mother thought that he was being abused sexually, let alone by a priest. She probably thought that growing up in the Roxbury section of Boston, that he was exposed to basically adults who basically didn't guide him in the proper direction. Now, his mother is very, very tough. And his mother actually, to survive, she had started selling drugs. And that was sort of like the beginning of his introduction into law enforcement and things like that. Yes, she did get arrested for interfering in the arrest of a neighbor, but to be fair, she had been basically committing, I don't want to say committing crime, but you could say that, but it was more of a way of survival, okay? And his first introduction to cocaine, he had basically ate fried chicken that he prepared for himself, and he opened a bag of what he assumed to be flour. And he basically put the flour in the chicken inside the flour, fried it, and ate it. And he was zonked out of his mind. And he didn't know what it was until his mother came home and was like, Bobby, where's the white powder I put in the refrigerator? And he was like, oh, you mean the flour? I used this for fried chicken. And she screamed at him and just, wails on him because that flour was actually cocaine that she was using to sell. Now, he didn't use all of it, but he used a lot of it. So that was money, thousands of dollars that went inside his stomach. But he was hungry and there was no other food in the house. Now, I believe that situation is what carried over to when Whitney introduced him to drugs when he was around the age of 20, when they first started dating, because he had already first experienced it when he was around 10 years old. So when he ingested it with the fried chicken, and you could look this up because this is in his autobiography that he released in 2015. Now I want to go back to the situation with the foster home and the priest. In the late 70s and 1980s, many people know this, but a lot of people don't. There were a lot of pedo rings that in this country that were actually disguised as foster care homes, orphanages, child service, nonprofit agencies, and you had people in the clergy, whether it was the Catholic Church, whether it was the Protestant Church, the Baptist Church, all these different religious organizations that were infiltrating, and they were basically not just abusing children, but they were even kidnapping children and using them for pedophile rings. Okay? So the situation with Bobby and the priest touching him, they were grooming Bobby to basically prepare him more than likely to be involved in a pedo ring. Okay? But Bobby having the street smarts, not just from knowing like, you don't touch me like that because it's not right, but it's like, yo, this might be bigger than just this man touching me. This man and these people around it may try to pull me into something that is far more worse than just this man touching me. So let me run away. So he ran away. And they never tried to pull him back. And probably because had they tried to, send him back there, he more than likely would have told, hey, these people are touching me. They're abusing me, and they're probably abusing other kids. So rather than to risk themselves getting caught, they just let him go on about his business. But that experience does cause a lot of children to act out, rebel against authority because they don't trust it. Because when they did trust it, look what happened. Being sexually abused. Also, having the urgency to have a lot of sex. Why? To prove that you are a man and that you're a straight heterosexual man. And even if you're not necessarily in the mood to basically have sex, you just have to prove yourself that you are this straight masculine man. So you're going to commit the act. And that a lot of times comes with the peer pressure of proving who you are as a man. That's another situation. Also publicly proving that when he was doing the dances, when he was grinding with the women, when he was grinding on a stage floor and stuff like that, all that was prove his manhood. Then he meets Whitney, and Whitney has her own issues. So it's like, well, goddamn, I'm thinking you're perfect. You're the queen of pop. What's going on? And then he gets introduced to drugs, and the drugs actually helps repress the memories of what happened, particularly with the priest. Then the alcohol comes. And then the rumors of his wife being bisexual with the friend, the famous friend that she had. And then he's trying to get his career back on track. But she's like, no, Bobby, you can't leave me because I don't want you around all these other women. But Bobby goes with these other women because Whitney is so drugged out with her issues. And then it leads to him being in his 30s and just being worn and tired, and then hitting rock bottom and finally being like, listen, I can't do this no more. I've lost practically everything. I need to rebuild myself. And rebuilding himself, when that happens with a lot of people who get clean, a lot of people, believe it or not, they get left behind. And it's not because the person who's getting clean does it, but it's like a lot of times the people that are still using, they don't want to get clean. And they don't want to basically get clean because they don't feel that they're ready. But the person who's committed to sobriety, they're like, listen, I care about you still. I love you, but we probably going to have to, separate. And that's what ended up happening. Because believe it or not, it was Bobby that first filed for separation. It wasn't Whitney. Whitney filed in 2006. But he had been left. After they filmed that reality show for Bravo, he was out the door. He was done with it because she was still using, and it had got progressively worse. Then he got with his current wife, and he's been clean. He's been clean. And I knew he was clean if you watched Being Bobby Brown. Many people thought Being Bobby Brown was going to have Bobby looking bad and Whitney looking, like Whitney. But it reversed itself. And he took a lot of heat through the years because people blamed him of being a bad guy. But the whole time, it wasn't him. It was a lot of the drug thing with Whitney, and then she introduced it to him. In terms of abusing, not using it for chicken. But I want to say I'm really proud of Bobby Brown. And I and my mother, we always knew that Bobby Brown would definitely make it and that he would actually overcome his addictions to drugs. And I know people who know the Brown family, and many of them told me that they basically had interacted with Bobby Brown, and they said that Bobby, a lot of times when they would see him, he was basically sober. It was Whitney that was zonked out high and had an attitude. And many people said, as long as Bobby is in her life, she's pretty good. But the day he leaves her, she's going to really, really hit rock bottom, and she might not make it. And I believe if Whitney and Bobby would have stayed together, particularly making it work with Bobby being sober and Whitney trying to be sober, I really think that Whitney would still be alive. I'm going to keep it a bean, 100%. I'm going to keep it a buck. But I feel that Bobby Brown's story doesn't have a happy ending, and it should be shared, which is why he has the biography 2-part series, and he's going to have a reality show as well. A docuseries is what they call it, to make it, sound professional. But it's a reality show, nonetheless. But this is my take on this topic. And thank you for listening. Hit the subscribe button, share, comment, like. And I'll talk to you soon. Later.